live. Second time lucky. Unfortunately I had the sound off. I wonder if this is a little bit loud. Let's see. It's better, isn't it? Okay, I am reading the autobiography of Joan Grant, one of my favorite writers. She explains reincarnation and far memory very well. It is called Time Out of Mind, and it was published in 1956. I am now at chapter 9, and it's, I think it's 1916 or something. Night duty. During most of the rest of the war years, I was either at Seacourt, where I attended the Mrs. Baker's Day School, a seminary for the daughters of gentlemen, as it was described on a brass plate on the door, or an equally innocuous establishment at Brighton, where we briefly had a furnished house so that father could come down from London every night. I was a model pupil to the point of smugness, winning good conduct prizes for punctuality and neatness. At Hayling, I even joined in netball, which I considered such a ridiculous game that I was always thinking of something else when I was supposed to be running after the ball. English governesses were unobtainable, at least by us, for they all much preferred war work. So I had mademoiselles who were refugees. One of them was a kleptomaniac, and the other had worms. "Everybody has worms," she cried indignantly when challenged by mother. "The long ones, the short ones, and the little ones, the little round ones, I have them all." She was sent off to a nursing home to get rid of them, and her successor almost succeeded in getting mother to banish Vodka, my bull terrier, from my bedroom. Vodka very naturally took a dislike to her, and so did Joey and Freddie, mother's marmosets, who used to sit happily munching mealyworms on the picture rail until she came through the door and then take a flying leap onto her head. If she kept still, I could disentangle them quite easily from her elaborate blonde hair, but if she shrieked, they were frightened and made messes, which put an end to French lessons for the rest of the evening, as she took ages shampooing it. School and mademoiselles were only the outer rind of my life at this period. What was happening to the other part of myself was far more difficult to tackle. In the ordinary way, the war made little difference to me, but I had no close relations at the front. There had always been lots of visitors. Now they wore uniform, for upwards of a dozen officers were billeted at Seacourt after a school of musketry was established on the island. Mother liked looking after sick people, so there was nothing unusual in having invalids and hospital nurses in the house, although now the patients had been wounded. But I began to have war dreams, which became increasingly detailed and vivid, no matter how hard I tried to shut them out. I used to find myself on a battlefield, grown up and usually in the uniform of a Red Cross nurse, although occasionally I was a stretcher-bearer. I knew I had reported for duty and received specific orders, either to explain to a man who had just been killed that he was safely dead, or to encourage him to return to a body that was not due to die yet, although it had been severely wounded. At first the memory of the dreams was no more unpleasant than it had been to remember going to the man whose feet had been cut off by a subway train, and I tried to remember them more clearly. Very soon I prayed not to remember them at all, but it was too late. I had to get so close to the person I was trying to help that I became part of him, feeling, seeing, fearing as he did, and that I could slowly, so very slowly, instill my own faith into him, and so free us both from the slough of pain and terror. I remember crawling through a sea of mud, with blood trickling out of my nose and mouth. I remember lying in a shell hole on top of a putrefying corpse with my arm blown off at the elbow. I remembered hanging on rusty barbed wire and trying to cram the slimy purple snakes of my guts into a hole in my belly. If I tried to tell anyone about my dreams, it worried or even frightened them. I was an imaginative child. The war must not be mentioned in my presence. I was forbidden to read newspapers. As though I wanted to read about the war. Iris tried to comfort me by saying that soldiers who were killed in battle went straight to heaven, and I tried to share her comfortable theory that the casualty lists were made up from people who had been shot neatly through the forehead or blown to bits like Billy. I might have been able to convince myself that ordinary Joan was not exaggerating the horrors if she had not seen the photographs taken by Glory Hancock. She was married to father's first cousin, Mortimer, and was another of my favourite people. Since the very beginning of the war she had been a Red Cross nurse, working so close to the front line that she had won decorations for bravery that were usually awarded only to men. Early in August 1916, she came to Seacourt for a couple of nights to leave Vestry, her son, with us for the summer holidays. He was 2 years older than I was, and I had been a staunch ally since, at the age of 6, he had thrown one of his football boots at a nanny who was deliberately pulling my hair. It hit her on the head and knocked her out. "Gloria is going to America on leave," said Vestry. "Officially, she is visiting Grandpa Battle in North Carolina, but why she is really going is to prod the Americans into helping us finish off the war." "How is she going to prod them?" "With photographs. Photographs she has taken in casualty clearing stations and hospitals. She doesn't know I've seen them, but I have, and they are jolly ghastly." "Can I see them?" "No, they would give you nightmares." "Nightmares," I said scornfully. "What do you know about nightmares?" "These ain't nightmares. They are real wounded soldiers whom Gloria helped to operate on and nursed, and some of them she had to sew up in blankets to be buried when in spite of her they died. I don't believe photographs can be nearly as awful as dreams. I dare you to show them to me." So he did. They were locked in Gloria's suitcase, but he knew where she kept the key. When I was my real self in dreams, I was sometimes very afraid, but I could face the fear and fight against it. When I woke up, I was only Joan, a child not yet 11, defenseless against the memory of sights and fears and smells. The smells were sometimes so persistent that I had to rush to the lavatory and be sick. To keep awake, I used to pull down my pyjama trousers and sit on the cold strip of parquet in the doorway between the bedroom and the passage carpet, shifting to another cold patch when the first one grew warmer. I tweaked hairs out of my scalp. I pushed matches under my fingernails. I held my eyelids open until the skin became so stretched that at the age of 10 they were as creased as an old woman's. It took me a long time to learn that even when sleep appears to be an enemy, it is useless to try to escape from it. Trying to cut off my dream life, I behaved as a smug little schoolgirl, for I longed to be safe and ordinary, a unit in a crocodile, a number in a class, a name cut with a penknife in an ink-stained desk. But the longing did not stop me dreaming. One morning I came down late to breakfast. There was a young man still at the table and no one else in the room. He was just another man in khaki, but the loneliness of keeping my dreams secret was so acute that I said, "Somehow I know you will not laugh at me. Last night I was with a man called MacAndrew when he was killed. I can describe the regimental badge, although I cannot remember the name of the regiment, except that it was not an English one, and I can tell you the slang name of his trench." The young man did not laugh. Instead, he had identified the regiment by my description. It was Canadian. Soon afterwards he wrote to father, "For heaven's sake, don't laugh at the child. I cannot attempt an explanation, but I have checked what she said. A battalion of that regiment went over the top on a night attack a few hours before she told me about it at breakfast. A private called MacAndrew was among the killed. She was even correct about the local name of the frontline trench." Father did not tell me about the letter until years later. I doubt if it would have helped much if he had. It became easier not to remember my dreams too vividly after Diana came to live with us because of the Zeppelin raids on London. She had been my best friend since before I broke my leg on my way to her birthday party. The summer holidays, when the Beddards took a furnished house at Hayling and I saw Diana and her brother Michael every day, were the best parts of the years. But it was even better having her staying at Seacourt. When she was younger, she wore frilly pinafores, which never got torn or dirty, even though she climbed trees better than I did. Florence, her nursery maid, brushed her long hair round the wood box sticks into ringlets, glossy as a barley sugar. Now she wore a velvet snoot like Alice in Wonderland, but her blue eyes had the same guileless expression which had always come in so handy in defending us from grown-ups. After her first day at the Mrs. Baker's, she decided it would be a waste of time to continue to go to school. "But how can we get out of it?" I said dubiously. "I have only just got rid of the last mademoiselle, and she was quite awful. Mother is letting your Florence look after me, but if she gets a governess for us—" "Leave it to me," said Diana briskly. "Within 48 hours I shall be expelled. Then we can have a daily governess, like I have in London. They leave directly after lessons and are generally no trouble." I doubted whether she would manage this, for I had never achieved such a simple solution in spite of all my efforts at boarding school. I underrated Diana. Next morning after prayers, she laid herself neatly down on a mat in the entrance hall of the school and began to scream. She screamed when mistresses gathered to ask what was the matter. She screamed when children flocked from the classrooms to stare. She screamed when the parents of a prospective pupil came to the front door and then hurried away without even waiting to interview either of Mrs. Baker. The only time she stopped screaming was during the lunch hour. The moment the gong went, she walked calmly downstairs, washed her face and hands, and ate every morsel on the plate, so that the mistresses could not comfort themselves by thinking she had a stomachache. The second day she followed the same routine. Miss Baker gave me a note to Mother. It implored her to remove the difficult child who is staying with dear little Joan, as we fear she's not having a good influence on the other girls. Mother was so offended at this gratuitous insult to the angelic daughter of dear Maud that never again did either of us pass through the portals of the seminary for the daughters of gentlemen. Our daily governess came from Portsmouth every day by the ferry and was a kind of old thing, so we were very nice to her. It was a blow when the raids stopped, or else people got so used to them that they were ignored, and Diana went back to London. Father had been in Birmingham helping Skipper Wilson to invent the tanks, but now he was back in London. So in September 1918, we all went to a furnished maisonette in Baker Street. There was no room for a resident governess, and Mother decided to send me as a day girl to a convent in Cavendish Square. I had been baptized twice, once as a Roman Catholic by a fervent one who happened to be staying in the house when I was a baby and whisked me round to her church to save my soul when she discovered that Father had no intention of having me christened, and a second time C of E, as he thought that the two ceremonies, both of which he considered barbarous, would cancel each other out. The only nun I knew was Sister Arsène, who was the theatre sister in the French hospital in London. One of the consulting physicians there, Dr. Septimus Sunderland, who had been Mother's doctor when I was born, used to send her to us when she needed a rest. The first time she came cannot have been very restful, as it was to nurse me during the first month after I broke my leg. I loved her, for she was very sympathetic about nightmares and gave me a picture of an angel which she said would protect me when I was asleep by standing at the head of my bed and a medal of Sister Thérèse of Lisieux, who was called the Little Flower because she sent down roses from heaven which turned into miracles. So I expected to be happy in a convent. But I was not happy. I was terrified. The nuns with their black rosaries jangling in the folds of their black habits, the echoing underground tunnel which joined the two houses in Cavendish Square, the shapeless black overalls we had to wear, formed the background of a terror which was all the more dreadful because it was illogical. Why was I so frightened? The nuns were kind. The other girls did not bully me. The lessons were easy. Why did I feel that something horrible was going to happen to me there? I did not find out that the thing I feared belonged not to the future but to the 16th century, until I was writing Life as Carola nearly 20 years later. All I could then do was to pray frantically to escape the daily purgatory of the walk down Wigmore Street, the horror of the doors closing behind me. On the 11th day my prayers were answered by my catching Spanish influenza. We all got it, except Mother, who looked after us all, as so many people in London had it, that I could not get a nurse. The maid died, and her body turned black before the undertaker could come to take it away. Iris nearly died too of double pneumonia. By the beginning of November we had all more or less recovered, and on the 11th of the month I was walking down Baker Street with Marjorie, when suddenly I heard maroons going off. I felt tears trickling down my face. "The war is over," said Marjorie, and I saw that she was crying too. Through streets which were filled with cheering people, we all went that night to the Criterion restaurants, and had a table in the window overlooking Piccadilly Circus. With us was Dicky Petal, whom Marjorie had been in love with since she came to Seacourt to be nursed after being very badly wounded. He had not asked her to marry him, and I knew this made her unhappy. Quite suddenly, in the middle of dinner, he raised his glass of champagne and said, in front of everybody, "Marjorie, please, will you marry me?" I couldn't ask you while the war was still on, as I was afraid of being wounded again and landing you with a cripple. She said, "Oh yes, Dicky," and the rest of us tactfully went out to the balcony and left them alone together. It seemed that everyone in London was in Piccadilly Circus that night, kissing, singing, cheering, dancing, climbing lampposts, clinging to Eros. But some of the bravely dancing people were crying. For them, the end of the war must have come too late. I hope this worked. Happy Sunday!